My name is Cindy Cisneros, licensed clinical counselor, certified creativity coach, and this is a video about another blog on the Creative Minds Therapy newsletter. And the topic this week is about the anxiety legacy of the 80s babies. Now, I'm not saying that all of us born in the 80s have anxiety, but I am saying that it's a theme, and I like to bring to my readers themes that I see with my clients and with the people that come to me for concierge therapy. So let me just give you an overview of what you'll find in the article. This is a topic, as an 80s baby myself, I had a lot to say about. And it was actually kind of really nice and therapeutic to write about. So the article is longer and has more content in it than what I'm going to put in the video. So if this is something that resonates with you, if you find this on YouTube, or if you start by listening to the video on my blog and feel more interested than what you're hearing in the video, please go and look at the additional content in the blog article. And if you find yourself feeling like you're identified or called out in this article, please feel free to reach out to me. Click one of the buttons nearby for a discovery session. So without further ado, I want to start out just kind of by introducing to you that if you find yourself as an adult feeling anxious, struggling with a nagging sense of maybe what I call inauthenticity, as a creative therapist, but just feeling not like yourself maybe, or knowing that you're not feeling as happy as you could feel. Maybe you've spent years trying to mold yourself into the person you were supposed to be, but then you wake up one day feeling like, I don't know that that's who I really am. Okay, this is a lot of us. And maybe you're a little bit after the 80s, maybe you're a little bit before, but this is kind of the benchmark. And there are reasons for this, and I want to unpack some of the reasons in this article. So let's start with because I said so. If you're from this era, this immediately is going to bring stuff back for you. This is a lot of how we were parented. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, or do it because I said so, or as long as you live under my roof, you follow my rules. I'm not trying to knock our parents here, but this is how parenting was. It was largely authoritarian. It was structured. It was rule heavy. It was focused on obedience. Emotions were not part of it. We were raised with this clear hierarchy, right? Parents are in charge, children comply. Discipline was strict. Sometimes it was harsh. It was not open for discussion. These are sweeping generalizations, but understanding why a rule existed was not a thing. We just followed it. Now, for those of us that are creative, have these creative personalities, this can hurt our soul. We want to understand why. We overall really want to be understood. And when we're told to do something and we're not given learning opportunities, we're just kind of given punishments, we're not giving external validation, we're not being given personal fulfillment, we can be left with these deeply ingrained fears about being wrong or making mistakes because we don't really know why something is wrong. We just know something is wrong, and that's going to mean disappointment or punishment or shame. And so we kind of get in this obsessive space of like learning to double check ourselves or chase perfection. And over time, it can lead to things like perfectionism, imposter syndrome. Maybe this is sounding familiar to you as an adult, hesitancy to speak up. All of this contributes to anxiety that you can feel as an adult because your worth becomes defined by external approval, and your mistakes feel like failures, not growth opportunities. Now, if you're a parent, you probably parent trying to help your children. Your young people feel like failures are growth opportunities, but that's not necessarily how you were parented. And in harsh situations, you may have ingrained these patterns into yourself from childhood and up to define yourself, and may not necessarily have healed from. You may have gotten stuck in, I am a failure, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. I want to talk about conformity because this is another theme of the time. for 80s kids, those of us born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, this kind of time period or thereabouts, conformity wasn't encouraged. It was the thing to do. So let's talk about conformity in a couple of places. I want to talk about home, school, and social conformity. At home, similar to that authoritarian household, being good, being obedient, this was the conformity, this was the status quo, this is what was the expectation. The focus is on meeting a set standard, not on being yourself, not on being an individual. Everyone in the family meets the set standard, and that's what it is. Now, if you're naturally creative or sensitive or unconventional, you could feel like at best you're misunderstood, but at worst you can feel dismissed and just completely ostracized. Now, creativity isn't seen as a strength necessarily in these scenarios, but as like frivolous or impractical. You probably heard these things. If your mind works differently, if you see the worlds in shades of imagination, and you're living in a black and white household, you could be labeled as too much, too sensitive, too difficult, too different. Maybe you got a diagnosis, and I see this all the time in this age group that I work with. Oh, I've had this diagnosis and this diagnosis and this diagnosis and this diagnosis, and none of them really felt like they fit. That's something that we talk about. You may have learned to suppress parts of yourself just to keep the peace, or silence your creative instincts in favor of practicality, hiding your emotions, abandoning interest. Oh, it hurts me to say it, but it's so true. And then we internalize the belief over time who we are wasn't good enough because we weren't predictable enough, digestible enough, or normal enough. So our childhood conforms us into some core beliefs like fear of standing out, struggles with self-trust. Oh, that's a big one. Disconnection from our creativity, which, if you know anything about me and my work and my creative vitality theory, one of the things that keeps you the most happy and stable as a creative person is your creativity. But you may have been shaped or learned early on to disconnect from it to survive in the circumstances in which you were placed. We didn't choose to abandon parts of ourselves. We were conditioned to do so. Conformity is not the same as belonging. So your authenticity is worth rediscovering, even if it means unlearning a lot of things that we were taught. Now, that's just one section of conformity. I want to talk about conformity in the school system. In the school system, and this is talking about public school because, again, this is sweeping generalizations. And I don't know what everybody's educational experience was like. But if the first place you learned the value of conformity was at home, then at school it was reinforced tenfold. There was rigid structure in education. Students were expected to fit in predefined categories. We were gifted. We were average. We were troublemaker. We were teacher's pet. We were cool. We were uncool. There wasn't room for nuance. There wasn't room for different ways of learning. You were tested. You were sorted. You were measured. Standards were inflexible. And your individual or personal strengths, unique learning styles, creative inclinations were not recognized. So success was determined on how well you fit into that mold, right? And so if you're neurodivergent, if you're creative, and the school system is a poor fit, that can leave you unrecognized, mislabeled. Frequently, neurodivergent girls are overlooked. Boys are disproportionately diagnosed with behavioral problems. This is something that people are, again, getting diagnosed or re-diagnosed at this age, as an adult age, coming back like, am I really this? Do I really that? Do I need this? This is how I grew up, but is this really something that I need to be spending time on, taking medication for? These things. Over the years, researchers have pointed to various explanations for this imbalance, but in general, current theories acknowledge systemic errors. Shocking. The result, many of us grew up feeling like something was wrong with us because we were different or we were seen as difficult. We were given labels that didn't fit us. And the case was, we are naturally creative. We're abstract thinkers. We were often pushed toward structure and logic instead of encouraged to embrace artistic strengths. So what does this do to us long term? Self-doubt, again. Imposter syndrome, again. Anxiety around performance. Disconnection from our natural strengths, again. So here we are with the problem was never us. How many times do I hear creative people taking on, oh, it's probably me. But it wasn't you. It was a systemic problem. And recognizing that can be an important step in helping you reclaim, here's the unique way that I think and see and break free from the anxiety that you embodied from these rigid expectations that we grew up with. Now, one last thought about conformity. I want to talk about social conformity. And this is a touchy subject, but it's worth noting because in this era, fitting in, again, was essential. And it was essential socially. Strict social categories around gender, race, socioeconomic status, they weren't super challenged. You were normal was the thing to do. And so it was a picture of how things were supposed to be, how you were supposed to behave, acceptable behavior, acceptable gender roles. So let's talk a little bit about gender roles. There were very specific pictures of how men and women were supposed to behave in this time period. Not a shock for anybody, but this was very much the case. Boys are tough and unemotional and competitive. Girls are polite and nurturing and attractive, not too ambitious. So this is reinforced everywhere. And if you didn't fit your assigned role, you're questioned, you're dismissed, you're ridiculed. I'm not saying that this is gone, but I'm saying that this was very much present at this time. And so if you don't fit into those boxes, if you have questions about those boxes, this can be stifling, especially for creatives who really feel that need to live authentically. You know, God forbid you're a girl who's ambitious. You're supposed to be more realistic. Or if you're a boy who's sensitive, oh, you're so weak. So you probably learned to suppress parts of yourself to avoid standing out. Or if you didn't, there was a lot of criticism, shame, self-doubt that went along with trying to express yourself. Now, race and socioeconomic expectations, this is probably not a shock either, but there wasn't a lot of representation. Possibilities were limited. The normal centered on white middle class experiences, narrowing the social belonging. So there wasn't a lot of representation for anyone who fell outside of that little lens where people of color are tokenized, riddled with stereotypes, left without role models, similar with socioeconomic status. There was rarely any recognition outside of these very simple narratives. There's not a lot of room for people who are struggling, for financial hardship. This is something that's treated as something to overcome and not a lived-in reality. That is the truth for many families. So if you grew up outside of a dominant cultural narrative, this little sliver of reality, then you feel unseen, you feel pressure to assimilate, or this is a big part of it. And any of us who lived outside of this little sliver of society, this is probably a big part of your experience. You felt expected to work twice as hard to gain the same recognition as others, with the underlying message being belonging comes at a cost of erasing parts of yourself. Oh, that's like chills, but that was exactly the message, wasn't it? And I'm not saying again that this is all gone, but we all know what this feels like, or at least hopefully are not too far removed to be able to see and understand the impact of that, which the lasting impact of that, again, anxiety, perfectionism, fear of being too much, unspoken rules about how to navigate the world, pressure to conform, to be likable, to meet expectations, to avoid making waves. It's, as a therapist, saying these things is very sad, is a very sad reality, but you have this persistent anxiety to get it right. And you will downplay your creativity, your authenticity, your emotions, your experience because you're trying to strive for this tiny little standard. And the message is the same. Being yourself is not always safe. Okay, but here's a truth. Here's a therapeutic truth, the creative truth. Real fulfillment doesn't come from fitting into someone else's mold. This is what I love about the work that I do and helping people see and step into their creativity. It comes from embracing who you really are. And that, again, can mean lots of unlearning conditioning, recognizing the pressures for what they were, and finding a way to step into your life now that feels authentic. This, without going too far off on a tangent, I do want to talk about people pleasing because this is a big lingering habit of our little 80s babies. And I wouldn't say all of us have done it, but I would say most of us, maybe all of us have done it. For example, saying yes when we want to say no, downplaying our opinions, ideas, or emotions so we don't make other people uncomfortable. Overworking, overgiving, overcommitting to prove our worth. Avoiding confrontation, even if it really bothers us, whatever the thing is that we're avoiding. And, oh my gosh, this one. Feeling responsible for how others perceive us. This is like most of us, right? It's a survival strategy. It's a habit of constantly adapting, smoothing things over, avoiding conflict, but the problem is it's at the expense of our own well-being. So it makes sense though, because if you grew up in a place where obedience, conformity was the modus operandi, you people pleased in a second nature kind of way as a way of filling the gap. You learned that approval, oh, this kills me. You learned that approval was conditional. How many times have I heard clients say this? The approval was conditional. If I step out of line, there are consequences, but if I blend in, then I'm safe. How anxiety-provoking and deeply unsatisfying is that for us as creatives? Because by nature, as creatives, we thrive on risk-taking. Self-expression, authenticity, wanting to be seen. And those are the things that are the opposite of people-pleasing. Disappointing others, being different, setting boundaries, those kinds of things are really difficult for people-pleasing. And people-pleasing is a temporary band-aid because by people-pleasing, we are betraying our authentic selves, which is really the antithesis of what you need to do as a creative person. Nothing, let me say this, as a creative person, as a creative individual, nothing is more suffocating than living a life for someone else. I want to talk about how to fix that. Okay. I loved, when I was in school, person-centered therapy. As soon as I heard it, it resonated with my little creative soul. And let me talk to you about why. Person-centered therapy, this is developed by Carl Rogers, is the idea that every person has a natural drive towards self-acceptance and fulfillment and growth. But it can only happen when you're able to align with your true self, free from the conditions of worth placed on us by others. So there is a section in the article that I won't go too deeply in that kind of goes into this theory and how it connects to everything we've talked about so far. But imagine the conditions of worth placed on you by others. I grew up understanding that my conditions placed on me by parents, by society, by the way in which I grew up had to be met in order for me to be worth or worthy of my place in society, of my relationships, of my love, of acceptance. But what if there was a type of therapy, or there was a process I could help myself deprogram from that and instead step into this natural self-acceptance where I can grow and live in alignment with who I am. That authenticity of the creative soul. So look a little bit more into kind of how, tied up with a bow, I pulled the pieces from the article into that theory if that appeals to you. But I want to say, if you look back on your experiences and you recognize you spent a significant part of your life feeling like a black sheep, or, and I mean that whether it's in your mind and you've been conforming, or you really have been actively swimming upstream when everything else has been kind of coming the opposite way, because I think we've all done versions maybe of both. But if you felt different and like you haven't quite fit in with the expectations around you, and that's probably, it's a big part of my story, and it's probably in some way, shape, or form a big part of many of us who have creative personalities, our story. And if now as an adult you might find your life feels confusing or inauthentic, or you realize I'm not quite sure that this is where I intended to be, then if this resonates, or you feel maybe a blend of anxiety or a nagging sense of disconnection, a lack of happiness or fulfillment, these are not random emotions. These could be a result of years of conditioning that made you prioritize others' needs over your own. Good news, it's not too late, and this is a perfectly natural and normal and common time to start unraveling those layers and connect with your true self. It can feel overwhelming, but the first step is to really kind of recognize how it's happened and what's happened, so you are not broken, and then you can make the space for creating your own routines, habits, beliefs, expectations that are your own. Honoring your own instincts, trusting your own needs, giving yourself permission to live in alignment with what truly makes you happy. I hope all of this information was helpful. I would love to connect with you if you feel like you would like to learn more about starting this journey, or even any of the information that I shared here. Wherever you found this article, there are buttons to click to connect with me to learn more. My website is creativelyllc.com. There are buttons and links there to connect with me if it feels right to you. And fellow 80s babies, I hope that you can shed some of the anxiety and move forward with the strength that we've all collected in our beautiful decades of life. All right, live creatively. Bye-bye.